I own an upscale French restaurant, and we had a booking for 50 people on the actual reservation day. My restaurant operates for lunch until 2 p.m. Then we close temporarily to prepare for the evening. I was in a small office, working on the lunch sales figures, leaving the cleaning to my staff. Suddenly, a young male staff member named Ben knocked on the door and called out, "James. James." When I replied, "What's the matter?" He opened the door slightly, and peeking in, he said, "There's a call from a Mr. Smith, who has a reservation today. He specifically asked to speak with you, James, regarding today's booking." Mr. Smith was a colleague at the company where I worked before opening my own restaurant. We had worked together for several years. He wants to talk to me directly. Huh? Muttering to myself, "Well, can't help it." I paused my tallying work and picked up the phone, lifting the hold music. "This is James on the line." Then, Mr. Smith on the other end of the phone said, "Hey, James. About today's reservation, we've decided to go for a barbecue instead, so consider it cancelled." So that's how it is. As I remained silent without an immediate reply, Mr. Smith added, "Sudden change of mind. Just not feeling like French cuisine today, you know." He laughed as if he was enjoying himself. "Cancellations on the day aren't really allowed, though," Mr. Smith responded. "It's just a policy, right? Hey, James, I was your former boss, remember? You can make an exception for me. Otherwise, I might have to spread some bad word about your restaurant. You wouldn't want bad rumors going around in the neighborhood, right?" I was perplexed, holding my head in my hands, thinking what to do. Interestingly, my concern wasn't about the sudden cancellation. For the moment, I said, "We don't have such a reservation." To which Mr. Smith replied, flustered, "What?" He continued, "What are you talking about? I called and spoke to you the Sunday before last. Booked the most expensive course for 50 people. You said, 'We'll accept the reservation for 50 people, didn't you?' Don't play dumb." I replied, "No, Mr. Smith's reservation is not in our online booking system." "What?" Mr. Smith panicked, to which I calmly informed him of a fact. "My name is James. I'm 32 years old, running an upscale French restaurant in downtown. It hasn't been smooth sailing to get here. That's because most chefs at top French restaurants usually learn at a culinary school, train in high-end establishments in France, and then return to the US to start their own venture. My path to independence was quite unusual. I had a dream of becoming a chef in elementary school but couldn't decide, thinking, maybe it's better to be an office worker, and ended up as a regular college student. However, in my second year of college, unable to give up my dream of being a chef, I took a leave of absence from university to enroll in a culinary school. I enjoyed cooking school and felt it suited me, but as always indecisive, I returned to university after 2 years of culinary studies. Then, swayed by my friends during my junior year, I went job hunting and, as a senior, received an offer from a general corporation, too good to turn down, so I accepted the job. I worked for a few years at Anderson Electronics, a manufacturer of electronic devices. The first year, everything was fresh, and I worked hard to learn the job. From the second year, I was transferred to the production management department, working at the bottom rung. The job was interesting, but the senior in that department was mean and the worst. Mr. Smith was in his 40s, a long-serving and overbearing senior at the company. In our department, there was a guy named Carter, who joined the company the same year as I did and was my age. He had been in the production management department since joining. "James, our department is a bit tense, isn't it? I've gotten used to it, but if you have any troubles, feel free to talk to me," he said, showing his concern for me. "Thanks. It's definitely tense, but Mr. Smith is a senior, so it's natural for him to be assertive. I plan to just follow his lead and do my best every day." I was only in my second year with the company, still learning and trying my best, so I honestly replied to Carter with that sentiment. Then, one day, "There's been a major mistake in our department. Be extra careful." The production management head warned us that day, and I was falsely accused by Mr. Smith. "Our James messed up. I'm sorry about that. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again," Mr. Smith told our head, which I overheard by chance. But I had nothing to do with that issue, and I believed it was actually Mr. Smith's responsibility, but the truth was hidden in darkness. 6 months after that frustrating incident, when our head resigned for personal reasons, Mr. Smith got promoted to head of the production management department. Despite my distrust in Mr. Smith, I understood that given his age and tenure, he was the right choice. I thought to myself, that's just how organizations work. And then, the worst nightmare began. I faced more blame shifting from Mr. Smith, unnecessary orders, and heard him bad-mouthing me everywhere. Mr. Smith was mean to all his subordinates, but it seemed particularly bad for me. Then Carter transferred to another department, and I lost my emotional support. Gradually, I became mentally exhausted, often fell, and started missing work. With persistent dizziness and headaches, I realized something had to change, so I took a leave of absence. During my leave, Mr. Smith contacted me, saying, "Your absence is causing trouble. Choose between resigning or returning. Decide quickly." I wanted to return, but working under such a boss would only worsen my health, so I reluctantly chose to resign. After leaving the company, I felt down for a while but took it as a good opportunity to rethink my life. Realizing I was still young and could try anything, I took a more positive outlook. My health improved after resigning, and I thought maybe it was time to give my old dream of becoming a chef another shot. From there, I worked hard. I boldly went to France using connections from my culinary school days and trained in top restaurants. I returned to the States and opened my own restaurant at 31. I might not be in my 20s anymore, but I'm still young and can do anything. With that self-encouragement, I diligently worked hard every day. Thanks to that, just over half a year after opening my restaurant, it started to really take off. People often tell me I have a talent for cooking, but I don't feel that confident about it. What I did keep up with was honing my culinary skills and innovating to keep the restaurant profitable. The knowledge I gained from a regular university and my experience in a general corporation played a big role in my business management. Then, one day, about a year after I started my own business, on a Sunday, after a busy night, I was cleaning up when the phone rang at the restaurant. "I'd like to make a reservation for next Sunday night, starting at 6 p.m. The brusque voice on the phone sounded familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it, so I responded as usual to a customer. "Thank you. Next Sunday evening at 6 p.m., correct? How many guests will be joining us?" Then, the man on the phone said, 50 people. Thinking I misheard, I asked, "I'm sorry, could you please repeat the number of guests?" Clearly irritated, the man snapped back, "Listen properly. I said 50 people. 50 people, is that correct?" I repeated. The man confirmed, "Yes. You can do it, right? A reservation for 50. Prepare your top course menu for all 50 of us." Well, it's not impossible, I thought to myself quickly. My restaurant is a 2-story building, usually using just the first floor for seating and the second as storage. But if I temporarily set up extra seating upstairs, it should work out. Understood. I will book for 50 guests. May I have the name and contact information of the party leader? I asked. "It's Smith. You're the owner, James, right?" The man on the phone introduced himself. I realized then, that voice, that manner of speaking, it was familiar. It must be Mr. Smith, the mean senior from my days as a corporate employee. Just to confirm the full name, he said, "It's Brandon Smith." No doubt about it. For a moment, unpleasant memories from that time started to resurface, but I quickly dismissed them as irrelevant now. "Mr. Smith, it's been a while." "Yes, this is James. Thank you for your reservation. I look forward to seeing you again on the day," I replied calmly, reminding myself that although I disliked Mr. Smith back then, we were no longer in a boss-subordinate relationship. I also thought it was nice that he chose to patronize my restaurant. "Is this reservation for 50 people from your company?" I asked. "Yes, it's a get-together for our department," he replied. When I stayed silent, he added, "It's for the sales department of Anderson Electronics. We're planning to do it big this time. Counting on you." I was momentarily surprised. The sales department likely included some employees I knew. "Understood. We look forward to serving you," I said. Then Mr. Smith said, "Thanks," and abruptly ended the call. 2 weeks passed. The reservation day for Mr. Smith and his party of 50 arrived. We operate for lunch until 2 p.m. and then close temporarily to prepare for the evening. I was in a small office tallying up lunch sales, leaving to clean up to my staff. Suddenly, a young male staff member named Ben knocked and called out, "James. James." When I asked, "What's up?" he opened the door and said, "There's a call from Mr. Smith, who has a reservation today. He wants to speak with you, James, about today's booking. He wants to talk to me directly." Huh? Muttering to myself, "Well, can't help it." I paused my work and answered the phone after lifting the hold music. "James speaking." Then, Mr. Smith on the phone said, "Hey, James. About today's reservation, we've decided to go for barbecue instead, so consider it cancelled." So that's how it is. As I stayed silent, not immediately responding, he added, "A sudden change of heart. Just not feeling like French cuisine anymore, you know," and laughed as if enjoying himself. Cancellations on the day aren't really allowed, though. When I replied, Mr. Smith said, "It's just a policy, right? Hey, James, I was your former boss, wasn't I? You can make an exception, can't you? Otherwise, I might have to spread some bad words about your restaurant. You wouldn't want bad rumors in the neighborhood, right?" Holding my head, I wondered what to do. Interestingly, my concern wasn't about the sudden cancellation. I wondered what the best way to deal with Mr. Smith might be. "For now," I said, "we don't have such a reservation on our system." Mr. Smith replied in surprise, "What?" He then said, "What are you talking about? I called and talked to you the Sunday before last and booked the most expensive course for 50 people. You said you'd accept the reservation for 50 people, didn't you? Don't play dumb." I responded, "No, Mr. Smith. Your reservation isn't in our online booking system." "What? Are you saying you failed to manage my reservation on the web, even though I specifically called to book? Can't you keep a promise? Such an incompetent manager. What kind of upscale French restaurant is this?" "Well, a restaurant that can't get customers will probably go out of business soon. No one will come tonight. Zero revenue." That's how Mr. Smith ranted. I wanted to retort with, "I don't want to hear about keeping promises from someone who cancels at the last minute," but I just muttered it to myself. I said, "Thank you for your concern about our revenue. We actually have another group of 50 guests who have already reserved for today, so there's no issue with our sales. It's a pity we won't see you, Mr. Smith." "What? Who would make a reservation for 50 people? Your small restaurant can't even fit that many people, can it? That's weird. Who's coming, anyway?" Mr. Smith retorted in disbelief. I almost burst out laughing again at his words. After all, wasn't it Mr. Smith who made a reservation for 50 and now calls it weird? I chuckled to myself, restraining my laughter. I replied, "As for who's coming, I can't disclose our customers' information as it's confidential." Mr. Smith made a frustrated sound on the phone. "What the hell? Ugh," he grumbled, then abruptly hung up. That night, my restaurant welcomed a party of 50 without Mr. Smith. The place was livelier than ever. The reservation was for our most expensive course. The guests all said, "The food here is really delicious," enjoying themselves immensely. Seeing my customers happy was my greatest joy, and my face beamed with happiness. With such a large party, all the staff who usually take turns for breaks worked full-time that day. After the meal service, I went to greet the guests. "Thank you for coming today," I said with a smile. The group's representative, a woman, laughed. "I was wondering what you were going to say coming over like this, getting all formal. I thought I should greet you as the chef. Having such a large group is really a great help for our restaurant." "Thank you, Jessica," I replied to the woman. Jessica. She was a former colleague of mine, and actually, she is my girlfriend. During my time as an office worker, Jessica, who was the same age as me, joined the company in the same year. We were in different departments, so we would chat in the hallways when we met. By the time I left the company, Jessica had transferred to another branch, and we completely lost touch. It seems she only found out about my resignation and restaurant opening much later. We reunited after I had started my own business. It was about half a year after opening my restaurant, just as it was beginning to find its stride. Jessica, unaware that it was my restaurant, came for lunch with a friend and was surprised to see me, the chef. I too was surprised to see her when I went to greet the customers. At that time, Jessica said, "I can't believe this is your restaurant, James. I was invited by a friend and had no idea. Sorry. I'm surprised to see you here and the food is incredibly delicious. I definitely want to come here again." True to her word, she often visited my restaurant with friends on her days off. That led to us, as old acquaintances, gradually starting to communicate more, exchanging messages and having private chats. I almost slipped into the story of how Jessica and I started dating, but let's get back to the dinner for the 50 guests. As the guests were nearly done with their meal and the evening was at its peak, the restaurant door suddenly opened with a bang. We had a private event sign up, and the dinner was supposed to be closed to other customers, so someone must have entered without seeing the sign. Just as I was about to explain the situation, I clearly saw the person who opened the door. It was Mr. Smith. "What the hell is this? What are you all thinking?" Mr. Smith yelled. The guests in the restaurant began to murmur. Then, Jessica spoke up as their representative. "Mr. Smith, you have no right to say that. I've heard everything from James. You tried to trouble him, and yet you dared to say such things." Mr. Smith loudly responded, "Jessica, when you joined, you were a charming employee. Betraying your senior, me. Ungrateful. People like you will have bad karma." Hearing this, another man stood up and counted. "I've heard the story, too. Smith, you never learn. Trying to trouble James' restaurant out of spite for losing your job. That's the worst. None of us here trust you. When you were fired by the CEO, you said, 'I'll reflect and change. Please don't fire me.' Those were just empty words. If you don't really change, you'll end up distrusted, jobless, and alone." That man was Mr. Williams. I never worked directly with him, but he was the sales department head at Anderson Electronics, where Jessica is currently working, a capable and respected man. From what I heard from Jessica, after I left, Mr. Smith transferred departments and became the head of the sales department where Jessica works. Mr. Smith continued to be selfish and harsh to his subordinates, leading to an increase in employees suffering mentally, taking leaves, or resigning. The remaining employees, troubled by this, directly appealed to Mr. Anderson, the company CEO, asking for a change in their department head. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, the CEO decided against simply transferring Mr. Smith to another department, as he would likely repeat his behavior. Instead, considering the well-being of the younger employees, he chose to fire Mr. Smith. When being fired, Mr. Smith begged the CEO, as Mr. Williams had said earlier, "Please don't fire me, I'll reflect and change." However, hearing all the negative feedback from his subordinates, the CEO proceeded with the termination. Mr. Smith, harboring resentment for some reason towards me, planned to trouble my restaurant by making a group reservation and then canceling on the day. But I was already aware that it was a trap when Mr. Smith said he wanted to make a reservation for Anderson Electronics sales department's gathering. Jessica had informed me that Mr. Smith had already left the company. Moreover, according to Jessica, Mr. Smith's mean-spirited nature had worsened, almost taking pleasure in harassing others. Though Mr. Smith was unaware of my relationship with Jessica, he had learned of my restaurant opening somewhere and had complained to other employees that James running a restaurant, "I'll shut it down someday." Jessica had warned me to be careful, anticipating potential harassment from Mr. Smith. After receiving Mr. Smith's reservation, I informed Jessica, who then discussed it with Mr. Williams, the current head of the sales department. Enraged, Mr. Williams said, "How dare he use our department's name for a fake reservation? Let's actually have our department's gathering there. If Smith plans to cancel, let's actually go through with a 50-person dinner. That way, he can trouble James, and it's a win-win situation." Upon asking his team, exactly 50 people agreed to participate. Among the participants were employees I had worked with who were eager to visit my restaurant. Even employees I hadn't met had heard rumors about me running a restaurant and were excited to visit, which I greatly appreciated. When Mr. Smith called to cancel, saying, "We don't have such a reservation," and informing him about another 50-person reservation, I felt quite relieved. However, I never expected Mr. Smith to actually show up at the restaurant that night. Seeing the gathering of his former colleagues, Mr. Smith stood dejectedly at the entrance. Then, "Carter, A former peer from my time in the production department spoke up. "Excuse me, Mr. Smith. It wasn't our intention to ostracize you. This event was Mr. Williams's idea to prevent any disadvantage to James's restaurant from your cancellation. Making a group reservation and canceling on the day is unacceptable. When I first joined, you taught me a lot about work, and I'm grateful for that. However, it was painful to see how you increasingly lost everyone's trust by being harsh and selfish based on your mood. Could you please reflect and change that aspect of yourself? I'd like to work with you again someday." Hearing this, Mr. Smith fell silent for a while before starting to cry. "Someone still says such things to me. I admit, I became arrogant and started ignoring others' feelings after gaining power. I too once worked hard and earnestly as a newbie. When did I become like this? I was weak, not cut out to consider my subordinates' feelings and manage work skillfully. I see that now," Mr. Smith said, crying. The room fell silent. "You may say that now, but trust can't be regained immediately. If you genuinely want to reflect and change, you must show it through your actions and gradually regain trust," Mr. Williams said sternly yet kindly. Though firm, his nature is kind. This personality trait was evident in his words. "Yes, we don't entirely lack gratitude towards you, Mr. Smith. It would be wonderful to build a trusting working relationship again," Jessica added. "Thank you, but since I've been fired, I can't return to Anderson Electronics. However, I'd be happy if there's a chance to work with you all in some other way," Mr. Smith replied, still crying. I observed with mixed feelings, unable to fully trust him yet, as his tears didn't seem entirely false. Half a year passed. Jessica and I, having a smooth relationship, decided to get married soon. Hearing this, our former colleague, Carter, suggested, "Let's go out for a drink to celebrate." So, the three of us went to a bar. I went to a client the other day, and guess who I saw? Mr. Smith, Carter shared. He's working at a small company that manufactures parts for our products. He seemed much calmer. I almost didn't recognize him. He was speaking gently and seemed to get along well with the employees there. Carter shared that information with us. "That's good to hear. I felt sorry for Mr. Smith when he got fired, and after all, we have him to thank, right?" Jessica said, looking at me. "Yeah." I nodded, and Carter, curious, asked, "What? What are you talking about?" "Because we started dating thanks to Mr. Smith," Jessica explained. "Really? I had no idea. What do you mean?" Carter asked in surprise. "I think it's a bit of an overstatement to say it's all thanks to Mr. Smith." I somewhat disagreed with Jessica's framing. But we did start dating after reconnecting when I visited James's restaurant and occasionally stayed in touch, though we were just friends for a while. It was only after we began talking about Mr. Smith that we started communicating more frequently, Jessica said. "Is that so?" Carter seemed both enlightened and confused. Indeed, Jessica's warnings about Mr. Smith and getting updates about him led me to stay in more regular contact, I said. "Yeah, so it's thanks to Mr. Smith," Jessica affirmed. "I guess it's one way to look at it, though it feels a bit off. But let's leave it at that," I said. Hearing this, Carter laughed. "Anyway, cheers to you both. Congratulations on your engagement." He raised his glass, and we all raised ours in a toast. Just then, Jessica exclaimed, "Oh," turning to where Jessica was looking. Carter and I saw Mr. Smith at a table nearby, enjoying time with his colleagues from his current company. Noticing us staring, Mr. Smith got up and approached. "Well, look who's here," Mr. Smith said, his face slightly flushed and in good spirits. "These two have decided to get married, so we came out for a celebratory drink." Carter pointed at Jessica and me. "Married? What? James and Jessica? Since when were you two like that?" Mr. Smith was surprised. "Mr. Smith, you were like Cupid for us," Jessica said, smiling. "What? I didn't do anything Cupid-like. Don't say weird things." "Well, anyway, hey, waiter. 3 beers over here. And some fried chicken too, a large serving." Mr. Smith called the waiter over and instructed to put the bill on his table's tab. "Wait, is Mr. Smith treating us?" Carter exclaimed. "Of course. Sorry, it's just beer and fried chicken for a wedding celebration, but it'll have to do," Mr. Smith said. "Yes, we accept." Jessica happily said, and I chimed in, I accept too. Everyone laughed, enveloped in a joyful atmosphere, and it felt like a closure to the unpleasant memories of the past. I had resented Mr. Smith when I had to quit the company due to health issues and thought I might never forgive him. But now, I became a chef, something I dreamed of since childhood, and owned my own restaurant. I was getting married to a wonderful woman. How happy I was. Mr. Smith, next time, don't cancel and come to eat at my restaurant. My cooking is really good, I said to him. Mr. Smith, looking regretful, apologized. I'm sorry about that time. I thought you were capable and honest, so I put pressure on you, hoping you'd work harder. But I was wrong. I became arrogant with success. Sorry, I realized my mistakes too late. I'm sincere now. Mr. Smith, please, look up, I said. In the near future, let me dine at your restaurant, James. I'll bring about 50 of my new colleagues, Mr. Smith proposed. I'll be helping at the restaurant after we're married, so I'll serve you too. We'll be waiting. Jessica joined in. I look forward to that time, a change of seasons, a moment I was sure would truly happen.